September 14, 1940, Kent countryside, 65 miles southeast of London. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 screamed through broken cloud cover like a falling star, its Daimler-Benz engine howling in mechanical agony. Inside the cramped cockpit, Hauptmann Klaus Müller, 24 years old, tasted blood from where he'd bitten his tongue during violent evasive maneuvers. The altimeter needle spun downward past 3,000 feet, coolant temperature gauge buried in the red zone. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 8 minutes he would be standing on British soil with his hands raised, his fighter intact beside him, and a dozen RAF officers staring in stunned disbelief. The story was already written in the smoke trailing behind him. A German fighter pilot desperately seeking safety, a British airfield preparing for another routine afternoon, and a landing so disastrous for the Luftwaffe it would hand Britain tactical intelligence they'd been desperately seeking for months. Right now, Muller focused on one thing: finding the French coastline before his engine seized completely and his damaged fighter became his funeral pyre. His mission had started 55 minutes earlier from Calais airfield in occupied France. A standard fighter sweep over the English Channel, protecting bomber formations returning from raids on London. But nothing about this war was standard anymore. Britain refused to break. Every sortie over English territory meant gambling with death. This afternoon, Muller's luck ran out. The Hurricanes appeared from nowhere, diving from the sun with practiced precision. Muller's wingman took cannon fire through his fuselage, spiraling away trailing flames. Muller yanked his stick hard left, felt bullets punch through his coolant system, heard his radio die with a crackling hiss. He climbed into thick clouds, lost his pursuers through desperate maneuvering, and immediately realized his predicament. He was completely disoriented. Coolant streaming from damaged lines, radio silent, fuel dropping fast, no visual reference to the French coast. The Bf 109 shuddered violently, engine temperature climbing into dangerous territory. Muller scanned the horizon desperately, searching for anything familiar. Then he saw it: water. A narrow channel of silver-blue water separating two landmasses. The English Channel, it had to be. Relief flooded through him. He banked south, following the water, absolutely convinced he was paralleling the French coastline toward safety. But what Klaus Muller saw wasn't the English Channel. It was the Thames estuary, and the land below wasn't occupied France. It was Kent, deep in enemy territory. He had no way of knowing his violent combat maneuvers had completely disoriented his internal compass. No way of knowing his desperate climb through clouds had spun him 180 degrees off course. No way of knowing that every second he flew south, he was penetrating deeper into Britain's heartland. The Bf 109 coughed violently. Engine temperature spiked past critical levels. White steam poured from the cowling, obscuring his forward vision. Muller's heart pounded against his ribs. Seconds. He had seconds before catastrophic engine failure. Below him, the English countryside spread out in orderly green squares. He spotted buildings clustered together, a long gray strip that could only be a runway, an airfield. Thank God, a Luftwaffe emergency field had to be. The Germans controlled this entire coastal region, didn't they? Muller circled once, studying the layout below. He saw aircraft parked in organized rows, hangars, a control tower, fuel depot. Everything appeared military, professional, exactly what he expected from a German installation. What he couldn't see from 600 feet up through steam-fogged goggles were the RAF roundels painted on those parked aircraft. He dropped his landing gear. The hydraulics groaned. The Bf 109 wallowed heavily, struggling for lift. Muller aligned his approach, wiping condensation from his instruments, already imagining the debriefing, the mechanics cursing his damaged cooling system, the hot coffee waiting in the ready room. On the tarmac of RAF Manston, Squadron Leader James Barrett stood near the operations building, reviewing maintenance reports. It was a quiet Friday afternoon. The morning's patrol had returned without incident. Routine, ordinary, almost peaceful. Then a corporal shouted from the tower window. Incoming aircraft, single engine, trailing smoke, unknown identification. Barrett spun around, shielding his eyes. There, descending from the northeast, streaming white vapor, was an aircraft he recognized immediately. Messerschmitt Bf 109, German, enemy, here now, approaching their runway with landing gear extended. His mind raced through possibilities. Defector, trick, damaged fighter attempting surrender. The aircraft dropped lower. 300 feet, 150 feet. No weapons fire. No bombs visible. No aggression. Just a crippled fighter limping toward what its pilot thought was safety. Except safety was 80 miles southeast across hostile waters. Hold your fire, Barrett commanded sharply. Nobody shoots unless I order it. Airmen grabbed rifles from the armory. Others stood frozen, watching something impossible unfold. A German fighter landing at an RAF base in broad daylight as casually as if he owned the place. Muller didn't see the armed men gathering below. He saw only the runway rising to meet him, the approach markers, the wind indicator showing gentle westerly breeze. Standard approach, nothing complex. He reduced throttle. The engine coughed, misfired, and died completely. Total silence except for wind screaming past the canopy. The Bf-109's nose dropped slightly. Muller compensated instinctively, holding the stick steady, gliding now fully committed. No power for aborting, even if he wanted to. The wheels touched tarmac with a harsh squeal. The fighter bounced twice, settled heavily, and rolled down the center line, losing speed, tail wheel touching down. Rough landing, but successful. Muller exhaled deeply, tension draining from his shoulders. Made it, safe, alive. He let the Bf-109 roll to a stop near the operations building, engine ticking as superheated metal contracted. He released the canopy, gulping fresh English air, already reaching for his harness release. And that's when he saw them. British uniforms, RAF blue, rifles aimed directly at his head, roundels on the parked Spitfires, Union Jacks on the tower. His blood turned to ice. Not France, Britain. He had landed in Britain. The realization struck him like a physical blow. His hands, still gripping the canopy frame, began trembling uncontrollably. Around him, 30 British airmen stood in a tight semicircle, weapons raised, faces showing shock, anger, and grim satisfaction. Squadron leader Barrett stepped forward, service revolver drawn but lowered. He stared up at the young German pilot whose face had drained of all color. Raus, Barrett said in rough German learned from intelligence briefings. Hand hoch, out, hands up. Muller understood perfectly. He raised his shaking hands slowly, carefully, and stood in the cockpit. He was lean, medium height, with blonde hair dark with sweat. Blood trickled from his nose where he'd struck the gun sight during combat. He wore standard Luftwaffe flight gear, iron cross visible on his chest. A skilled pilot who'd shot down 5 Allied aircraft in 3 months. A promising ace. Now a prisoner, his mind spun wildly. How had this happened? He'd followed the coastline. He'd navigated by landmarks. The water, the channel, it all made sense, except it didn't. The compass, the violent maneuvers, the clouds. He'd gotten turned around completely, flown exactly opposite of where he thought he was going. The cruelest possible mistake. 2 British airmen approached cautiously, rifles steady. Muller climbed from the cockpit, his legs nearly giving out as his boots touched enemy ground. The airmen grabbed his arms, not violently, just firmly. Professional soldiers doing their job. Christ almighty, one muttered in English. He just landed here, just bloody landed. Barrett holstered his weapon and approached the aircraft, studying it with barely concealed fascination. The Messerschmitt Bf 109. They'd been fighting these for months. Intelligence reports described its capabilities, but having one intact, undamaged, every system accessible, every secret exposed. This was intelligence gold. He turned to Muller, who stood between 2 guards, hands now secured behind his back with cord. His face showed pure devastation, shame, horror, the expression of a man who'd committed an unforgivable error. Corporal, Barrett called. Get Group Captain Henderson on the telephone immediately. Then contact Farnborough. Tell them we have something special. The corporal sprinted toward the operations room. Around the Bf-109, airmen gathered, examining the sleek fuselage, peering into the cockpit, studying the wing-mounted machine guns. Look at this cooling system, a mechanic said. Liquid-cooled inline engine, completely different from our Merlins. Another whistled softly. This thing must climb like a rocket. A young pilot, barely 20, stared at the aircraft with mixed awe and hatred. Our boys are dying fighting these. Barrett nodded grimly, not for much longer. Now we'll understand everything about them. Muller was escorted toward a small brick building serving as the station headquarters. He walked mechanically, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of his failure. He had delivered Britain one of Germany's frontline fighters. He had exposed every secret of the Bf-109's performance. He had given the enemy exactly what they needed to develop countertactics. The weight of that knowledge threatened to suffocate him. Inside the headquarters, 2 RAF officers waited. One spoke fluent German, an intelligence officer named Captain Winters, hastily summoned from the intelligence section. Hauptmann Muller, Winters began, his tone professional, measured. You are now a prisoner of war. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Do you understand? Muller nodded without speaking. Winters studied him carefully. You're not the first German pilot we've captured, but you are the first to land voluntarily at one of our airfields with an undamaged aircraft. I did not land voluntarily, Muller said, his voice hoarse. I believed I was over France. I thought this was a Luftwaffe field. Winters translated for the other officer, who gave a short, humorless laugh. Your navigation? Muller looked at the floor. Combat disorientation. I followed the coast. I saw water. I thought the realization choked him. He couldn't finish. The enormity of the mistake was crushing. Winters leaned back in his chair. You've had a catastrophic day, Hauptmann, but you're alive. That counts for something. Muller's jaw clenched. Alive, yes, but dishonored. Captured. Responsible for potentially countless German deaths as Allied pilots learned to exploit every weakness in the Bf-109. His survival felt like a curse. A medic entered carrying a first aid kit. He approached Muller cautiously, gesturing to his bleeding nose. May I? Muller hesitated, then nodded. The medic worked quickly, efficiently, cleaning the blood with gauze that smelled of antiseptic. Muller flinched but remained still. The medic applied cotton packing, stepped back. "You'll be fine," he said in English. Mueller understood the tone, if not every word. The same professionalism, the same basic decency. It confused him. Everything he'd been told about the British portrayed them as barbaric, ruthless enemies. Yet here, in his first hour of captivity, he'd been treated with unexpected humanity. Outside, the Bf 109 was already being photographed from every angle. Group Captain Henderson had arrived within 20 minutes, his staff car screeching to a halt near the aircraft. He circled it slowly, deliberately, his weathered face expressionless, but inside, his mind calculated furiously. This single aircraft, captured intact, represented an intelligence breakthrough that could alter the entire air campaign. For months, RAF pilots had struggled against the Bf 109's superior climb rate, its fuel-injected engine that didn't cut out during negative G maneuvers, its excellent high-altitude performance. British pilots were dying because they didn't fully understand their enemy's capabilities. Now they would. Every component, every control surface, every performance characteristic would be tested, measured, documented. British engineers would disassemble the Daimler-Benz engine, study the fuel injection system, examine the armament layout. Test pilots would fly it, push it to its limits, discover its vulnerabilities. Within weeks, new tactics would be distributed to every RAF squadron. Avoid turning fights, force them into prolonged climbs, exploit the Bf 109's limited fuel capacity, attack during negative G maneuvers when their engines cut out, know when to engage and when to disengage. This single landing, this one navigational catastrophe by one disoriented German pilot, would save dozens of Allied lives. Henderson turned to his operations officer. "I want armed guards on this aircraft around the clock. No one approaches without authorization from Farnborough. Transport team should arrive by morning." The officer saluted and hurried away. Henderson glanced at the headquarters building where Mueller was being held, 24 years old, an ace. A skilled aviator who'd made one catastrophic error. In another world, they might have discussed flying, compared experiences, shared stories. But this was war, and war offered no sympathy for honest mistakes. Inside the office, Mueller sat on a wooden chair, hands still bound, staring at nothing. Captain Winters had left to coordinate with London intelligence services. The two guards at the door looked uncomfortable, uncertain how to treat a prisoner who'd simply landed and surrendered without resistance. One of them, a private named Thompson, cleared his throat. "Would you like some water?" Mueller looked up, surprised. Thompson held out a canteen. Mueller hesitated, then nodded. Thompson carefully held the canteen to Mueller's lips, letting him drink. The water was cool, clean, the best thing Mueller had tasted in hours. "Dank," he said quietly. Thompson nodded, stepping back. The small gesture of kindness, so simple, so unexpected, made something crack inside Mueller. His eyes burned. He blinked hard, refusing to cry before his captors. But the weight of what he'd done, the scale of his failure, pressed down on him like a physical mass. He had been so certain, so absolutely sure he was flying toward safety, following the coast home, making correct decisions. And every decision had been precisely, catastrophically wrong. By evening, word of the capture had reached the highest levels of British command. Prime Minister Churchill himself was briefed, reportedly remarking, "The Luftwaffe's generosity knows no bounds. We must remember to thank them properly." At RAF Farnborough, the Air Fighting Development Unit prepared frantically for the Bf 109's arrival. Test pilots, engineers, intelligence analysts, everyone wanted to examine this legendary fighter up close. Everyone wanted to fly it. The next morning, a specialized transport team arrived at RAF Manston with equipment to carefully dismantle the Bf 109's wings for road transport. Ground crew worked with reverent care, treating it like the priceless artifact it was. Mueller, watching from a window in his temporary cell, felt physically sick. That had been his fighter, his aircraft, the machine he'd trusted with his life dozens of times. Now it was being dismantled, studied, violated. All because he'd turned the wrong direction. All because he'd trusted his eyes and his faulty judgment. A knock on the door. Captain Winters entered carrying a tray with bread, cheese, tea. "Thought you might be hungry." Mueller wasn't, but he nodded anyway. Winters set the tray down, pulled up a chair. "You'll be transferred to a prisoner of war camp tomorrow, somewhere in Scotland. It's not comfortable, but it's tolerable. The war will end eventually. You'll go home." Home. The word felt meaningless. Would Germany even want him back? The pilot who'd handed Britain one of their greatest intelligence coups? Or would his name be erased, his family disgraced, his service record marked with eternal shame? Winters seemed to read his thoughts. "I know what you're thinking, that you failed, that this mistake defines you." Mueller said nothing. "But you made the only choice you had," Winters continued. "You were lost, nearly out of fuel, flying a crippled aircraft. You could have crashed, died alone, accomplished nothing. Instead, you chose to survive. That takes courage." Mueller's voice came out raw. "I gave you everything. Yes, Winters said quietly. You did, and I won't pretend that doesn't matter. Your BF-109 will help us. We'll save pilots' lives. We'll probably change how we fight this air war. He paused. But that's not your burden to carry alone. Your commanders sent you up with inadequate navigation training. Your equipment failed you. Your situation gave you impossible choices. You were 24 alone, making split-second decisions with incomplete information. Mueller looked up, meeting Winters' eyes for the first time. You are trying to make me feel better about betraying my country. Winters shook his head. I'm trying to help you survive the next 5 years as a prisoner. Guilt will destroy you if you let it. I've seen it happen to good men. He stood, moving toward the door. Eat something. Rest. Tomorrow's a long journey. After he left, Mueller sat alone with the untouched tray before him. Through the window, he could see the Bf-109 being loaded onto the transport truck, its distinctive profile wrapped in canvas. His fighter, his mistake, his legacy forever.